This is Agriculture Today. I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. Ahead of us on this Tuesday's program, we start with K-State professors of biology, Ratajczak and Jesse Nippert. They share the outcomes of over 30 years of research conducted on the Konza Prairie that demonstrate the significant role that bison can play in encouraging biodiversity and resiliency in grassland plants. Also ahead, K-State beef cattle nutritionist Blasi previews the upcoming 2022 Stalker Field Day, which will be occurring on September 29th at the K-State Stalker Unit. We end today's programming with this week's milk line from K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk. This week, he encourages producers to take stock of the straw they have available, prioritize its use, and he emphasizes considering options for extending its use this winter. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now with an interesting piece of research that was conducted over a 30-year period, really, here at K-State, longer even. And it's the significant role of bison to the Flint Hills environment. And to cover that, we have with us today lead author and K-State assistant professor of biology, Ratajczak, as well as Jesse Nippert. He is a K-State professor of biology as well. So thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So, like I said, this is a pretty significant chunk of research that you guys have both contributed towards. It's spanned over 30 years of data at this point, and it's been collected at the Konza Prairie. So tell us a bit about it.
So Konza Prairie is a research site that's been running for, depending on how you count it, 40 to 50 years here in eastern Kansas. And it was initially founded to perform a landscape scale experiment to understand how fire and large grazers shape this ecosystem. So it's been going on with different fire manipulations and grazer manipulations for 30 to 40 years now. And one of the big goals is to understand how this ecosystem functions over very long time scales and at very large scales.
You mentioned grazers being a big part of that research, obviously bison being one of those, but bison were very nearly wiped out from this region how long ago?
Yeah, so the extirpation of bison in Kansas took place over a long period of time, predominantly in the 1860s, 1870s, and 1880s. The last record of bison in the Manhattan area was in the mid-1880s. One wandered into town and was shot. And when they were released back onto the Konza Prairie in the mid-1980s, they'd been gone for nearly 100 years from this area.
Wow. Well, there's no wonder why the reintroduction of them was so significant and something that you guys wanted to study specifically. So what really have the results shown of this over 30-year study that you've been looking at with these bison being reintroduced?
Well, what we found is that in tallgrass prairie, it's one of the more productive Great Plains grasslands. And we have a handful of species that, in the absence of any large animal, become very dominant. So it's a set of very dominant grass species, in particular, big bluestem. And so what we've been finding is that bison are actually very good at consuming this specific species and other dominant grasses in very large quantities. And what that does is it leaves more room and resources for other species to become established. Tallgrass prairie is not a system that changes very quickly, so what we saw was actually increases in plant species diversity initially, but they've continued to happen now for 30 years, and that cumulative effect now has essentially doubled the amount of plant species we find in the tallgrass prairie plant communities.
It's not only the biodiversity that's significant that you guys found, right? It's also the resiliency of those plant species?
Yeah, so you could say we were fortunate and unfortunate that in around year 20 of the study, in 2012, we had one of the most serious droughts to affect the area in at least 40 years, if not longer. We know these kind of events are probably going to become more common. They're probably going to be more intense when they occur, and they might even last for much longer than that 2012 drought. But that still gives us a bit of a window into our future here in Kansas and whether or not our plant communities are going to be resilient to these events that are going to become more common. So what we saw was that initially the number of species present decreased by 25%, but the community was able to recover those losses in 2 to 4 years. So although it wasn't resistant at first, it was able to bounce back afterwards.
Wow, significant for sure, especially when we're considering not only the drought of 2012, but kind of the drought we're experiencing now, right? A little similar in terms of what we're seeing?
Yeah, so it's sometimes difficult to quantify droughts and their impacts. And in a state as big as Kansas, one portion of the state can be experiencing, a drought, while another portion of the state might be getting too much rain. And so sometimes it's a little bit difficult to contextualize. In terms of like local consequences of drought, you can think about, for native plant communities, you can think not only about mortality and completely dropping out of the system, but you can just think about sometimes it can be premature senescence, it can be lack of flowering, it can be like loss of local pollinators in some cases. So it sometimes is difficult to actually quantify your local effects of drought, but we do have year-to-year variability, which is a natural part of our weather patterns here in the Great Plains. But then we do have these years like 2011 and 2012 where the depth and significance of those drought really are more severe than in other years.
Part of the research that you guys contributed towards were comparisons made between grazing bison, but also grazing cattle, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And were some of the effects very apparent, or were there also similarities that you guys found between these two grazing types?
Well, there's definitely some similarities, which we were expecting. They're both large grazers. They're both ruminants, which means that they're consuming grasses and then fermenting them. And so what we see so far is that cattle, like bison, decrease the abundance of these dominant grasses, but not quite as much as bison. And that seems to be part of the reason that they also don't increase plant species diversity quite as much. So they're still having a very positive effect. It's just a slightly different magnitude. And we should include an important caveat that the experiment, much like real-life management in Kansas, has both different species, so bison versus cattle, and slightly different management of the two animals. So the bison are present year-round, whereas the cattle graze intensively at higher densities during the summer, and those areas rest during the winter. We think most of the differences are due to the animals themselves, but there's definitely future work to be done to also pinpoint the effects of different types of management as well.
Excellent. Well, research to look forward to hearing about for sure. You guys are currently on your 8th grant for this continuing research study that's, like we've mentioned many times now, been going on since the 1980s, really. And it's totaled well over $31.6 million. Will this research continue? You kind of just hinted at it just then with what we were speaking about.
Yeah, we're very fortunate to be a part of this long-term research program that is sponsored by Kansas State University and the National Science Foundation. So we're part of what's called the Long-Term Ecological Research Network, or LTER network. And what it does, that network does, is it has a system of protocols for types of data to be measured the same way year in and year out. And so we collect data on populations of organisms, so plants and grasshoppers and birds and small mammals and aquatic communities. We measure changes in soil through time. We measure changes in nutrient cycling through time. And then we also keep climate records. And all of this long-term ecological data that is measured at the Konza Prairie is put online and made available to anyone in the community free of charge, both here locally in Kansas as well as nationally and internationally. It's available to anyone. And then by doing the same measurements in the same way year after year after year, some of these subtle changes that you wouldn't notice in a 5-year study, like Zach mentioned earlier, start to be obvious as like big changes that are taking place over the course of decades. So by doing studies like this over long periods of time allows us to see patterns and trends that wouldn't be obvious in a shorter term experiment.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really unique aspect of the research that you guys are getting to conduct at the Konza, is the fact that it's all publicly available. That's not something that's common, I feel like, when we hear about these big, huge research studies. You have to read about it in a very scientific journal that's maybe hard to access, but it's all publicly available online, from what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's correct. The Konza LTR program has a prominent webpage, and all of the data we collect and the people who work out there and the types of questions we ask and everything from what was the precip patterns over the last year to what was the changes in groundwater quality and chemistry over large watersheds in the 1980s. All of that data is available online from the Konza LTER webpage.
Excellent. Well, we're very lucky to have the Konza Prairie as a resource here at K-State, and I'm sure you guys feel the same way about it. I myself, as a new person to the area, have explored it as often as I possibly can and have taken the chance to go out and explore opportunities that are offered by those of you that work out at the experiment stations. For you guys, what is it like personally day to day working out there and getting to firsthand collect that data and work on it?
We're lucky we get to work out on Konza doing a lot of different things. One of the authors on this paper, Jeff Taylor, has actually been responsible for collecting the last, I believe, 10 years of this data. So Jeff's really integral to this study. What Jesse and I do out there is just a set of different projects. We combine field data, but to be honest, probably a bigger chunk of our job is sitting at a computer analyzing data or answering emails or writing manuscripts or something like that. So
managing students.
Yeah, managing and teaching too. Half of our positions are teaching as well. So the nice thing about it actually is you get to do all kinds of different things day to day. There's very few days that are similar one after another. So it's can be a little bit of a I'm trying to find the right word here, disjointed kind of position, but it's still a lucky position to be in.
Yeah, it is definitely a blessing to have the Konza here. I'm a native Kansan, and all of us in terms of working here, these grasslands are our heritage, and there's something to be proud of. And, there's something to both learn from and respect, and then to continue to investigate. And so I feel very fortunate, and we all do, for having this tremendous resource within K-State's research umbrella. But it really is a tremendous privilege for us to be able to work out there, and it's also an opportunity for new folks to come and start to ask questions and to get involved, with some of the scientific research that we do.
Yeah, I would add as a non-native Kansan, this is what drew me here. I did a position here when I was an undergraduate student and kind of just could not get rid of me after that point because it's just such a really nice place to work. It's a beautiful place to work. And like Jesse was saying, just don't hesitate to reach out because how this works is a study over this many decades is by new people coming in and becoming part of the program. By definition, that's the only way this kind of program will continue to exist.
Absolutely. Well, I can't thank you both enough for your time to come in and speak to us about this study and the benefits of research like this that goes on at the Konza every single day. So thank you both so much for your time.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks. It was fun.
Absolutely. Once again, that was Zach Ratajczak. He is the lead author on this research study, as well as a K-State assistant professor of biology. And Jesse Nippert, he is also a K-State professor of biology. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. Agriculture Today. We are back now with Dale Blasi. He is a K-State beef cattle nutritionist, but he also is in charge of our stalker unit here at K-State. And today, Dr. Blasi, you're joining us to talk about the upcoming Stalker Field Day.
Yes, Samantha, Thursday, September 29th, our 23rd rendition of this event.
Let's talk about the history of this event. 23 years in the making. So obviously there's a significant history with that.
Yes. Initially, when we started programming specifically in the stalker and backgrounding areas, we initiated with a conference, if you will, at a local Manhattan hotel where we basically ran a full-day conference in the confines of a hotel conference area. And eventually, with the development of the beef stalker unit that started in 2003, we were able to transition it over to the KSU beef stalker unit to where it is today.
Excellent. And the stalker unit here at the university, it applies so many opportunities for not only research and other things that we'll talk about here shortly, but also opportunities for students to get hands-on access to research.
Absolutely. Our coursework throughout the College of Agriculture, the unit is only located about 5 miles from campus. So that really affords the instructors, the teachers to conduct course sessions out there and allow the students to attend without really impacting the ability of the students to get back to other coursework that is here on campus. So it really facilitates that, being so close in proximity to K-State.
Absolutely. And leads to job opportunities for some of those students as well?
Absolutely. During our busy times, fall and spring semesters, we typically have upwards of 6 undergraduate students who spend a varied amount of time at the unit, anywhere from 10 to even 20 hours per week. It provides them a good learning opportunity. A lot of students have not had an opportunity to run a feed wagon or a skid steer and really to learn about the day-to-day activities, fence building, cattle management, cattle processing, all those activities are available for those students that we're able to get hired and are able to be dependable and show up to work 15 minutes early, and we afford them that opportunity for sure.
And if you haven't had the chance to visit the facility yet, it's one of the most beautiful campus facilities I have ever seen. It's honestly stunning. Beautiful land, beautiful cattle, and excellent research going on, and obviously learning opportunities as well. But Dr. Blasi, I know last year you guys had just started some of the research that you guys are going to be talking about really at this year's Stalker Field Day. So tell us a bit about that research.
Sure. We just wrapped up. Actually, today we just shipped 5 loads of heifers on from the Stalker unit to finish up the last component of this study. But in essence, we just completed and will be sharing the results from a study that looked at the impacts of limit feeding and superimposing the importance of shade for cattle. And since 2016, our Stalker unit has worked on considerations of limit feeding. And limit feeding has been around since the mid-1980s. It's certainly not a new concept, but it's a concept that in the climate of what we hear, it seems almost daily, the whole climate of sustainability and everything. This is a practice that with documentation and with us sharing and amplifying the results that we have conducted with our work since 2016 shows that we can sustainably grow cattle in a manner that reduces manure output by about 45%. Improves feed efficiency by about 30%, and is without taking into consideration the consumption of fuel and tractor time and mixer time, feeding once a day versus twice a day. And then on top of that, the enhanced ability for cattle health detection. We really think that in a dry lot environment, limit feeding is the way to go, and the results that will be shared by Dr. Tarpoff will show that it's very consistent with the results. The one thing that we did determine from our first-year results, and with water meters installed into each of our pens, and we do have 40 pens on site now at the Stalker unit, we were able to determine that cattle that were limit-fed and provided with shade consumed 2 gallons less water than those cattle that were ad libitum fed and in an unshaded pen environment. So again, from a sustainability perspective, saving our resources, and I think in Kansas we all appreciate the importance of our water resources, especially when many portions of our state are in severe water deficiency. I think things like this are what helps us at the Stalker unit and certainly at Kansas State University provide leadership for our beef industry to help our producers become as efficient as possible.
Yeah, some impactful research there for sure, and I'm sure results that everybody tuning in will look forward to hearing more about if they attend this event. But in terms of other speakers that producers can expect to hear from on this Stalker Field Day this year, what else can we expect?
Almost every year, I tried to organize and pull together a panel of producers to address issues that may be on the minds of the attendees. And I try to pull in the experts in those particular areas. In this particular year, I pulled together a panel consisting of folks that are working in areas surrounding transportation. Kansas is a black hole, if you will, for pulling cattle in from all corners of our country for our dominant cattle feeding industry and certainly our cattle processing and our food industries. And so we pulled together a group of folks. Mr. Jeff George from Finney County Feed Yard is going to be our feedlot representative, our feedlot manager representative. Aaliyah Hilker Heiss, CEO of Hilker Trucking out of Cimarron, Kansas. Her comments will be very illuminating to hear about the challenges that folks that run truck lines have to move cattle from point to point. Jera Settles is a lead counsel for the Livestock Marketing Association, and so they work very closely with many of their member auction markets throughout the country. And so as people purchase, we're talking about commerce, moving goods, and in this case, we're talking about live animals, and we have to be cognizant of the importance of moving those animals in a comfortable environment from a creature comfort perspective and moving them from one point, perhaps in an area, to another part of the country and doing it in a timely manner. And then finally, Margaret Ann Smith, an alumnus of the Animal Sciences Department at K-State, has developed a very reputable cattle purchasing company, Southlex Cattle Company out of Glasgow, Virginia. And she has issues dealing with trying to find the truckers. Those folks, COVID has been disastrous on our trucking industry in terms of many of our experienced bull haulers retiring and simply walking away from their job and leaving that to inexperienced folks that were charging their care of these cattle for 14, 15, 20 hours on a truck. And so she has some very illuminating comments as well. And like I told you earlier in this interview, we just shipped 5 loads of cattle this morning with another 3 loads this afternoon off of the stalker unit. And so the coordination and everything that must occur between where the cattle are going, where they're being picked up, and doing it in a timely manner. But we're dealing now with fuel surcharges and everything upwards of $5.50 to $6 a loaded mile. I mean, folks need to consider this transportation charge as they make their purchase decisions with their stalkers. And so, again, this will be an opportunity for folks to ask questions by Wes Ishmael. He formerly was with Beef Magazine when it was in the print. He is now the executive editor for the Hereford World. And Wes just does a marvelous job interacting with panel participants, and I'm sure the attendees will really enjoy the outcome of what is discussed during this period of the program.
Transportation, a key area of our industry that I feel like is often forgotten by many. In terms of future plans for the stalker unit itself, it's such an important facet of our university here at K-State, and especially of our animal science program. Where do you see the direction of the stalker unit going?
Well, certainly, Samantha, we're going to continue doing impactful research that is of use for our Kansas stalkers and our backgrounders. My colleague, Dr. Casey Olson, he is also on the program. We're into year 4 of a multi-year project looking at the implications of burning native pasture at different times of the year. And so he will be reporting the impacts of what we've seen here over the last 4 years by burning in the late fall versus our traditional spring burn. And coincidentally, the stalker unit was the site of the first research looking at the use of burning. And so we have a lot of history there, and I tip my hat to the wisdom of the folks that come before me back in the late 1940s that actually made the purchase of the property. And so we're going to continue that spirit of work to help our Kansas industry for sure.
Well, we look forward to all the research that we produce out of our stalker unit. But in terms of people that are interested in attending this field day that we have coming up, once again, September 29th, how can listeners register, and what should they anticipate cost-wise for registering?
Well, Samantha, certainly for those folks that are well-versed with the computer, go to our the source of beef information at Kansas State University is ksubeef.org. Registration upwards to September 15th, that is Thursday this week, is $25 per participant. And for those folks that are on the fence and maybe show up, the charge will be $35. So it's an extra $10 charge. But it's so darn important for us to have an accurate meal count. Several years ago, I made the unilateral decision to go with a sole sponsor. And that helps us to clear up any time that would be necessary for a trade show. And so with a sole sponsor this year being, and I very much appreciate the support of Behringer Ingelheim Animal Health. They're our sole sponsor, and certainly appreciate their input and their support to make this an affordable event for our producers. And again, this is the 23rd rendition, and we're looking forward to having a good program for producers.
Absolutely. So those wanting to register, be sure to register within the next few days of hearing this. But Dr. Blasi, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Samantha. Absolutely.
Once again, that was Dr. Dale Blasi. He is a K-State beef nutritionist, sharing information about our upcoming Stalker Field Day. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. Straw, which is in short supply and expensive, will be needed to protect cattle from cold stress this winter. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk encourages producers to take stock of the straw they have available, prioritize its use, and consider options to extend its use, such as adding corn or milo stalks into the bedding pack whenever possible.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning bedding needs for the coming season. As most of you are very well aware, straw is in fairly short supply and fairly expensive. So as we think about bedding our animals over the winter and protecting them from cold stress, it's going to be important to really take close stock of what we have on hand, what's available to us, and maybe consider some other options as we think about how we might make better use of the straw that we have on hand and other things that we can include in the bedding pack that might extend the use of the straw. As we think about what we're going to need, keep in mind you have different needs on the farm, so you need to think about how you're going to prioritize the straw that you do have available or that you can purchase in the next few months. Probably calves should be a number one priority. They're probably the ones that are most prone to cold stress and actually experience cold stress at a lower temperature than other classes of animals. So how much straw will you need for calves? That brings into question how many calves will you actually have around over the winter months. Are you going to continue to keep all the bull calves, or are they going to go someplace else? Maybe you're planning on moving all your calves off the farm to a calf raiser or some other form of housing. If that is the case, then that greatly reduces what you'll need for that particular class of animals. Now, let's talk about the lactating cows as well as pre-fresh cows. Most of us probably house our pre-fresh cows on some sort of bedded pack. How can you extend the use of straw in this area? Well, number one, if it's dry and we really don't need to put bedding out, we probably shouldn't. However, if we get moisture, then we're going to have some bedding available to the animals. So how are we going to supply that? Do you just use straw, or do you consider some other things? Well, obviously we can use other crop aftermath like corn stalks that have been baled or milo stalks would make fairly decent bedding. Not as good as straw, but at least provides a base. You might consider using corn stalks as a base and then put a little bit of straw on top of it. That will extend the use of the straw and minimize the amount that we have to utilize per bedding. But straw still absorbs a lot more moisture than corn stalks do. Corn stalks, although, provide an excellent base, particularly if the ground is wet, so applying corn stalks first and then some straw later would be a way of extending the use of the straw. Now let's move on to the lactating cows. Probably don't use a lot of straw in this area on most of our dairies. However, we may have a calving pen or we may have a hospital pen that is bedded pack. Again, use of corn stalks or maybe milo stalks in this area can provide part of the bedding, probably for moisture absorption when we have a lot of animals in those areas, or during times when we do not get much drying, i.e. higher humidity. Probably going to still have to use some straw to keep animals clean. But the corn stalks or the milo stalks would provide an excellent base, and then apply a thin layer of straw on top of that. Now, moving on to the rest of the dairy, we have heifers, developing animals. Again, a lot of times we don't have to bed those animals, but we do have to have bedding when we have storms, particularly snow or rain events, so that we can keep those animals dry and comfortable. Again, this is an excellent place to consider using corn stalks or milo stalks in place of straw. You could also use a mixture, corn stalks or milo stalks on the bottom, straw on top. But many times when we're short of straw, this is an area where we could actually save. Probably not as critical to have that bedding quite the same as what we would for calves, i.e. the insulation value of the straw, but we still need some bedding. So corn stalks or milo stalks would be an excellent choice. Now, as you consider all this, you're going to have to also think about the equipment needed as well as the increase in the labor to apply different layers of different materials. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to consider how they're going to bed animals during the winter months.
Thanks, Mike. And that'll do it for the Tuesday edition of Agriculture Today. For Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.